Question to the entire panel. Has Brexit been worth it? Has it been a benefit to farming?
That is me asking that question to that panel of experts about British farming, but also there was Anthony Glees from Buckingham University, who specialises in history and politics and national security. Sean Rickard, a former economist for the National Farmers Union. James Cleverly, an MP for the Tory party. Dr. Clive Back from Shore Capital. And YouTuber and historian and farmer, Ollie Fletcher. And the answers were a bit wild, especially considering that UK food exports to the EU are down by about 34%. Farming incomes have declined since Brexit by about 20%, but you have to bear in mind the weather and COVID. And 70% of cereal farmers have said that Brexit has harmed their farm. So let's see what the panel had to say. First up, a professor from Buckingham who specialises in national security.
Has Brexit been worth it? Has it been a benefit to farming?
I think it's been a disaster for this country. It's been done, and we're Democrats, got to accept that 52%. But if you look at what the people who were promising it were saying at the time, we realise how much of it was fiction. And I dwelt on Michael Gove's most, but look at what my colleague, Professor Minford from Cardiff had been saying. I mean,
if you remove protection of the sort that has been given in particular to the car industry and to other manufacturing industries inside the protective wall, you have got you're going to have a change in the situation facing that industry, and you are going to have to run it down, and it will be in your interest to do it just in the same way that we ran down the coal industry and the steel industry. These things happen.
He actively wanted to destroy British farming. His idea was that there should be no British farming and no British manufacturing, because he said that would lead to a 7% growth in GDP after Brexit. Well, Professor Minford is still saying these things. The Financial Times talked about the future of farming as a niche industry. You could sell Stilton cheese and Cornish pasties, and that would be it. So it has been a disaster. It does be, I'm very sorry indeed that the gentleman to my right is not leader of the Conservative Party, because I feel that had he been leader of the Conservative Party, he would have seen that there needs to be some kind of a way forward that accepts that Brexit has happened, but understands the damage that Brexit has done. And I'll vote for his party again when he does become leader, because I still think that is the only reasonable way forward.
Notice the little cheeky grin he's got on his face there, but I've got to say, wild that he thinks that this can still be fixed. I don't. Next up, an economist, Sean Rickard.
Well, I can only echo what has been said. Frankly, it's a disaster. I'll just take a slightly different tack. A lot of people now say to me, well, yes, it hasn't worked out, but it was an exercise in democracy, and we really ought to defend that. To ask people to vote for something you have no idea what it involves, no idea what it costs, and which you strongly suspect is going to make them poor, but lie about it the whole time, is not an exercise in democracy. It's quite the reverse of it, and it's one of our most shameful things we've ever done. And the party that thought it was going to save them.
Boom. Up next, James Cleverly.
So I was a representative of a rural constituency for the Brexit vote, and I didn't have members of my agricultural community queuing up telling me what a wonderful thing the EU was. I had people telling me that the subsidy system didn't work. I had people telling me that it was all geared up for very, very large acreage or large hectare European farmers, that it didn't suit British farmers, that the was it 3-crop rule, 5-crop rule? I can't remember. Some of it didn't work. So before Brexit, I had a whole load of farmers telling me our relationship with the EU didn't work. And post-Brexit, I've got a whole load of farmers telling me that post-Brexit it doesn't work. Now, I think that, so I campaigned and voted for Brexit because I always felt that it would impose disciplines on the British government. I got fed up with every ill being blamed on Brussels, and that the British government said nothing I can do about it because Brussels made me do it like one of the big boys at school.
He comes up with these analysis which is pretty accurate that the government was blaming everything on the EU, which was causing discontent in the public. But then it goes off on a wild one. He basically is ignoring the fact that the government were doing that to get attention away and accepting blame for themselves like a child would do at school, and shunting it on the EU.
My view is governments should make meaningful decisions and to be held accountable by the electorate for those decisions. And I think there are things that could and should have been done post-Brexit that can still be done now. You know, we look at the circumstance now, we have this conversation, and we seem to have missed the fact that we had one of the most disruptive events in living memory happen 3 months after we left the European Union with regard to COVID, and we had a major and hugely disruptive European war. So any kind of economic comparison before Brexit, post-Brexit, is massively distorted by that.
Unless, of course, you're one of these organisations, such as the International Monetary Fund, the OBR, the Bank of England, the OECD, the LSE, Citibank, Financial Times, Bloomberg, the Economist, New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, the Independent, the Times, the Telegraph, the Atlantic, Oxford University, Cambridge University, King's College London, Edinburgh, Manchester University, Cardiff University, UCL, Warwick University, and Glasgow University. If you're one of these organisations, you're all advocating to return to the European Union as soon as possible because this is an unmitigated disaster. James Cleverly doesn't want to listen. You may also be wondering why I didn't respond to any of this at the time. Well, it didn't feel as if it was my place. My place was just to ask the question, have a response, and then have some thoughts afterwards. Maybe it's something that'll change in the future.
There is definitely work that we could and should do domestically. Frankly, I don't believe for a minute that the only way the British government can be supportive of innovation, growth, and a positive future for British farming is if a bunch of bureaucrats in Brussels make us do it. And if that is the truth, then we might as well just scrap domestic politics completely.
Why don't we run the politics?
So I absolutely think we can and should have a domestic environment or a domestic regulatory and legislative environment which supports the things that we value in British food and farming production. We're not there yet, and I think this Labour government has taken some big steps in the wrong direction. But as I say, domestic governments should make decisions to support their people and their industries. And food and farming is one of our key industries. It might not be the biggest by GDP contribution, but it is an absolute key sector, and it is our duty as politicians to make sure that industry is supported. And as I say, we don't need to be bullied into it by Brussels.
It's funny when you listen back to these because you suddenly realise that they're actually advocating for Welsh and Scottish independence from the United Kingdom, and Scotland in particular, who were forced to leave the EU against their will.
So that's a yes. It was worth it. Yes, please.
Yeah.
If you want back in the EU and to repair Britain, don't vote Tory, don't vote Reform, don't vote Labour. Interestingly, you are going to see pushback from other members of the panel later.
I'm not a politician, and I did vote to remain, but I do think an 85% turnout is representative. People forget that. And I do respect the decision in terms of what the British did. There is no doubt that the last government balls up, not just Brexit. And I think there's been a really serious deterioration in the capability of the civil service in the UK, like a systemic reduction in the capability of running this country. It's nothing to do with Brexit. First of all, the European Union today is not what it was in 2016, and I would say it's structurally weaker. And what being outside the European Union does by default and by design is give us agility. And agility, I think, of a country the size of the UK is extremely important strategically. We are very good at talking ourselves down, but we are still a top 10 global economy. And as I said earlier on, we're probably in the top 3 in terms of world intellectual capability at our universities. And I see those as tremendous strengths. And so in that respect, we should respect and want to get on with the European Union, and we should be closer. But it was the European Union that called Article 16 on the UK in the pandemic. People forget that. They're still sulking, and we've kind of moved on. Agility is really important when it comes to things like genetics. Sean talked about technology. the future, the intensification of agriculture in the UK will involve more genetics. We're world class at that. Our NHS is also an amazing life science capability. We've got the biggest database in the world. And if you want to bring health and food together, food policy and the NHS outside the European Union is something we can sell to every country in terms of the future of medicine, America, Japan. We are alone in that capability.
I almost find what he said to be something similar to that of a Monty Python sketch with the Black Knight, where you've been injured and you talk about agility, even though you've just had your arm chopped off, with a 4% GDP cut, with 40 billion lost in tax. But the other thing is, the industries that he advocated for, which I think he's absolutely spot on about, we would still have those. We would also have access to European scientists who could come over and work. And then on top of that, we'd be able to sell that stuff without having to do a separate regulatory body to the EU. So I don't really get what his points are, other than we just have to get on with it and, keep on fighting without two arms.
So I'll finish by saying what the statements made by the Leavers were just nonsense. But I would also say, as someone who works in banking, the UK economy did not collapse after Brexit vote. And the bullshit was talked about Remain was just as equal, and people got tired of it.
I don't agree. It's like analysing a football match this way. One side said they were going to win 10-0, the other side said they were going to lose 10-0. The actual result is a 5-0 drumming. You lost 5-0. And you're still trying to suggest that it was bullshit on both sides. I don't get where he's coming from on that either. Next up, Ollie from Farming Explained.
Well, since food policy has been returned to our own government, we are left in the situation that was very clearly spelled out in Professor Tim Lang's food security report, whereby we run our import-reliant food system on a just-in-time basis through some very centralised distribution routes. This makes us incredibly vulnerable to any external shocks, be it war or climate change, which is increasingly affecting our domestic food supply and is much worse in other parts of the world that we rely on for food. And equally, if an enemy nation wanted to paralyse our economy, they could do it just by attacking a very small handful of distribution centres. It is an incredibly dangerous situation, both in terms of our ability to procure food in a literal sense, but also in our ability to distribute it once it's here. So I think the government really needs to have a very serious rethink about the just-in-time food system, and as Professor Tim Lang recommends, revise it into a just-in-case food system that will be more resilient to shocks.
So, do you think it was worth it then?
Well, I forget
Yeah, I know.
Brexit. Well, at the moment it seems not, but agriculturally speaking at least.
I'll just make a comment. The problem was with Brexit, it was voted for, but it was voted for by saying that we would stay in the single market, and then we came out of the single market. So Brexit is...
If you didn't catch that, the guy said, "I don't think that's true." Here's a clip of Daniel Hannan, who led Leave EU, saying exactly what Liz said.
Absolutely nobody is talking about threatening our place in the single market. Norway, Switzerland, all of these countries have complete free trade with the EU. And by the way, I can't help noticing that they're doing pretty well. But to repeat, absolutely nobody is talking about threatening our place in the single market.
Because only a madman would actually leave the market.
We have a great independent future, just as countries like Norway and Switzerland enjoy.
We'll find ourselves part of the European Economic Area and with a free trade deal.
Well, actually, Norway, Iceland and Switzerland do pretty well.
Brexit is a very divisive problem, but without doubt, coming out of the single market put trade barriers between us, farmers, and our biggest market. And so, as Donald Trump has done with his tariffs, it's exactly the same thing with what we did with Brexit. So now we do need to get rid of those trade barriers because we depend on imports from Europe, and we depend on being able to export to Europe. And all we've done is make that transaction more difficult and more expensive. So if we want to continue to be safe, it makes sense that we actually get rid of those trade barriers. There's also no choice, because to the west, I don't know if you noticed, we just have the Atlantic Ocean.
Not done yet because the historian pushed back on Cleverly and the financial guy.
First of all, the discussion about the civil service and the bureaucrats, that kind of, the civil service point, it really does stick in one's throat, because the argument about the European Union, they're terrible bureaucrats, this, that and the other, we could run it much better ourselves. Well, actually, we can't. We don't have a civil service that could deliver. I could be very boring and say a lot of our brightest civil servants wanted to go off and work in Brussels. And we shouldn't forget, we were in Brussels. So it's not Brussels and us. We were part of it at that time. But that's, water under the bridge. What isn't water under the bridge is that there are only 3 regulatory regimes in the world: America, China, and the European Union. And we can tell ourselves wonderful stories about how, we're the 6th, 7th largest economy, etc. But this is a world where size matters. And we have to find some kind of relationship with our strong neighbours right next door to us. The Labour government haven't done it, previous governments didn't do it, but the idea that we can float around, yet we are vulnerable, and that is the most awful thing, I think, for people in this country.
Every single person on that stage agreed that British farming is in crisis. The only debate, who caused it and whether we can fix it. And the concern is, if they keep misdiagnosing things and suggesting that Brexit is a benefit, you're not going to get anywhere. It needs to be repaired. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Please hit that like and subscribe button as well. It all helps the channel and the video gain traction. And if you want to start pushing back on Brexit, a great way to start is to use this tool for smart voters. This is a tactical voting website that shows you how to vote in order to make sure Reform doesn't win a seat in your area. Link in the description, and thank you to all of my Patreon YouTube supporters who keep this channel going and growing. Thanks for listening, bye for now.